How do you respond when parents or teachers approach you as a trustee, maybe to share their concerns about the school? What's your approach when someone wants to speak to you in the car park or at a social event? And what are some of the underlying issues that you need to be aware of as a board member? In this video, we look at your obligations and practical strategies for dealing with stakeholders that want to raise a complaint or a concern about the school or the people therein. Perhaps first, we need to reiterate that the authority of the board is vested in the board as a whole when they meet formally, and not in individual trustees. While it can be incredibly hard, and perhaps even tempting, to lend an ear to some gossip, trustees must guard against generalizing from your own personal experiences that may lead to conflict of interest down the road, or being unwittingly pulled into being a spokesperson for a particular constituency or interest group. Your duty is that of a trustee, so that you'll want to ensure all complaints are handled according to policy, and criticism should be directed to the head of school or board chair. So the easiest way of managing a situation when you get cornered at a social function or in the car park is to have a standard phrase, polite but firm, along the lines of, "I'm sorry if there's some confusion, but the board focuses on policy and long-term strategic issues and leaves the day-to-day management of the school to the head. And in this case, it sounds as though you should direct your complaint or your concern to the head or the primary principal or the teacher concerned, whichever seems most appropriate." It's actually helpful if all the trustees are on the same page, so to speak. So practice using the same approach, and it's usually when one or two trustees become known as a sounding board or a spokesperson that this actually splinters the board and that fractures can appear. This can be particularly important for those new to the role of trustee, since the uninitiated trustee won't necessarily have the experience to understand the complexity these issues can cause, nor have the strategies to deal with the complaint. And it's often the case the concerned parent may then see the new trustee as the saviour, the voice of reason that they've been looking for on the board. This can obviously be taken as a bit of an ego boost to think that the parent or teacher has such faith in you that they're bringing the complaint directly to you to help them, but without the experience to realise that, consciously or not, you're potentially just being manipulated. And so there are two misconceptions that often go hand in hand when there are individuals or interest groups. On the one hand, especially for boards that elect trustees, the trustee needs to gain the support of the electorate. However, the duty of loyalty as a trustee is not to that constituency or group, but rather to the school as a whole. On the other hand, the general perception among stakeholders is that power is vested in the individual trustees, who are suddenly empowered and knowledgeable. The reality, however, is quite different insofar as the power of the board is enacted only when the whole board is officially gathered. An accumulation of knowledge and wisdom about the school is an incremental process that takes time. There's another complication, perhaps a third arm, if you will, that results from the first two. In understanding your role and responsibility as a trustee, your ability to speak freely in public has actually diminished. While you may understand that you have no individual authority, the parents and teachers will still perceive any message that you deliver as coming from a position of authority and knowledge on the board. So whereas before joining the board, you may have engaged in deep conversations with other parents about menu choices for lunch or complaining about the quality of the soccer activities, to do this as a trustee now draws you into being a spokesperson for the individual or interest groups, where it may be claimed that you now have a conflict of interest or may actually be working against the rest of the board. A fundamental principle for all trustees is to speak with one voice as a board and support the school. And so having splinter discussions now undermines the board and in turn the school. There may be times when, despite your best efforts to remove yourself from the grip of a parent or a teacher that's pulled you aside, you actually need to receive the complaint or concern. If this is the case, then there are a couple of practical strategies that can help you to manage the situation. If the parent or teacher is angry or upset, it's usually better to find somewhere quiet out of earshot of other people. This privacy gives you an opportunity to handle the issue sensitively and removes one layer of unnecessary complexity. Assuming that you've tried to inform the person that you're actually not the best person to listen to the complaint. If they persist, then do take the time to listen actively. If you need to paraphrase or repeat what you think the issue is, then this is helpful in distilling down what may be a rambling story to one or two actual concerns. The important thing here is to aim for understanding, but not for agreement. You may be hearing about the issue for the first time, and regardless, you probably have insufficient information to make an informed opinion. If you agree with a complaint, keep it to yourself. If you openly agree, then the person will believe that you support him or her, and unconsciously, they will see you as an advocate or spokesperson. If you disagree, then you may be setting a scene for the complaint to become an argument. So, it's usually far better to reserve your own judgment, but to listen carefully and understand their perspective on the situation. Having listened to the complaint, and you're clear that you as clear as you can be about what the actual issues are, then you can use this as a way to reiterate the school's policy for dealing with complaints and direct the person to the appropriate staff in the school or the head of school. You may not fully recall all the different layers of management structures within the school, and so if in doubt, direct the complaint to the head of school. But where possible, identify the lowest level. Now, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but if the issue is about how children are behaving in a certain class, then the specific teacher response has the insight to be able to respond to the complaint. If the issue is how children behave in the playground or in the primary school, then the primary head or elementary principal might be the most appropriate person to speak to rather than the head of school. At this stage in the conversation, there's a temptation to accept responsibility for the issue. And the moment you do that, you're acting as an advocate or spokesperson for that complaint. In some situations, particularly when dealing with particularly charismatic or important parents, it can seem very hard to refuse. But to be true to your duties as a trustee, the best you can do is suggest that you contact the head of school so that he or she can then set up a meeting with them. Whichever the case, the important last step is for you to inform the head of school of the complaint, the people involved, and if there was anything that you suggested, such as contacting the teacher. You'd have to use your discretion as a trustee, knowing that individual complaints shouldn't be elevated to the board unnecessarily, while recognizing the duty of every trustee to safeguard the interests of the school. So there may be a situation where a complaint is so serious or so general that it merits immediate circulation to the board and head of school as an FYI. This is a heads up, and it allows other trustees the opportunity to respond to similar concerns that maybe people are raising with them, with a phrase such as, "Yes, the board is aware of this situation and we're looking into it." Remember the principles of building a strong relationship with the head of school, and the 3 T's: trust, transparency, and tolerance. The culture of no surprises is one that's built from the head of school to the board, as well as from the board to the head of school. Where the head has learned of an issue arising, he or she may have already alerted the chair or the whole board about the potential for concern in a certain area. And again, this allows trustees to say that yes, they're aware of this situation that's brewing and are actively investigating the issue. Equally, when you receive complaints or criticism, you should inform the head of school and have the trust in the systems that are in place to deal with it. If you're not happy with the way in which complaints are handled, then either the system may be inadequate or the people involved with the system may be at fault. But neither of these really is an excuse for the board to actually involve themselves in the process. Okay, so what about the scenario where the parent or teacher reaches out to you personally because they're not convinced by the school's procedures? Many parents might say that they're afraid to speak to the teacher or the principal or the head of school for fear that their child will somehow be penalized. Other times, parents complain that the leadership doesn't listen, the leadership doesn't do anything about the issue, or they're just getting stonewalled by the school's policies. In essence, the same advice applies really. Consider for a moment the implications of handling the situation differently. Say a parent complains about something, and you voice your agreement with the complaint. What unconscious messages are being sent to that parent? That the board knows about the issue and is doing nothing about it? Or maybe the board has mixed views on the issue and is not speaking with one mind? Or perhaps the board have one opinion, but the head of school isn't implementing the procedures. What then? There are so many ways in which this agreement could be taken. And by the time the angry parent has retold the story half a dozen times to different parents, the issue can snowball out of control. What happens, having agreed to champion an issue on behalf of a parent? Well, what's the opinion of the head of school, who may simply be following the policies that are set by the board? How does the head of school perceive this attack on the decisions that are taken, and now this rogue board member who's not following the agreed procedures for handling complaints? As you can see, it all gets complicated really quickly, especially if you haven't thought it through. The bottom line is that you should be very, very aware of the potential to be pulled into these situations and to ensure that you understand the protocols for dealing with complaints. Under no circumstances should you as a trustee be involved in mediating a dispute, as this undermines your role on the board and it immediately escalates the issue to board level or beyond. If the parent is concerned about following a standard pathways for a grievance, then maybe you can suggest a third-party mediator, maybe a counsellor or another trusted member of staff, but please don't be tempted to step in yourself. What about anonymous complaints, you say? Well, this should be something that you discuss as a board and agree a position on how these will be handled. Some schools are absolutely resolute in not accepting any form of anonymous complaint, unless, of course, there's something that concerns an immediate danger of harm, such as a bomb threat. Others may argue there's no smoke without fire, and so you want to investigate whether or not there's anything to substantiate the claims. Another view that's gained traction over the last few years is the concept of a whistleblower. So how is a whistleblower different from an anonymous complaint? Generally, a whistleblower is an employee who raises concern over dangerous or illegal activities that can have an impact on the other people in the school. The whistleblower isn't necessarily affected by the dangerous or illegal activities, and so has no personal or pecuniary interest in the outcome of any investigation. Whistleblowers are simply alerting authorities or others about the supposed wrongdoing, so that a proper investigation can ensue, but with no obligation to provide proof of their concerns. A complaint by an employee, on the other hand, or any stakeholder, usually involves personal interest, of not being treated fairly, and that the unfair treatment is somehow in breach of employment rights or something similar to that. The anonymous complaint is therefore made in order to receive justice for the perceived wrongdoing, and has a self-interest in the issue and the outcome, and therefore the employee or stakeholder would be expected to provide proof to support their case. That is, an anonymous complaint cannot be considered in this case unless the person's prepared to name themselves and provide proof to support their claim. Having reflected on some more of the issues around dealing with complaints, are there any action points that you need to work on, do you think? Are there things that you need to do or conversations with the rest of the board that you think maybe should be taking place?